Today we're going to be doing our for and against series, continuing with She-Hulk. I feel like this was a hero, or is a hero, that was very misunderstood when she first came out, myself included. I didn't really get how great she was or how great she could be. Not everything is perfect. There's some few weaknesses in her kit that aren't great, but in general, I think she's a lot better than we gave her credit for, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for growth with her that we'll get into as well in a little while. Really quick, the whole point of this series is to kind of talk as objectively as possible. So I'm not going to be talking so much about my subjective feelings, but I'm going to be talking about cards I use, ways I use her, what I think is good, what I think is bad. And at the very end, we'll kind of do like a more or less like an overall review of her. So let's go check out her cards first. All right, so let's start on her alter ego side. Jennifer Walters has 5 recovery, which is huge. And she's going to need that big recovery because she starts off with 15 hit points. This was absolutely massive when she first came out. Crazy amount of hit points and a 6 hand size and alter ego. It has I object, interrupt when threat would be placed on a scheme, prevent one of that threat, limit once per round, which is pretty interesting. It's a nice way to use it if, especially early on, if you're playing solo, a lot of the main schemes just add one, so you can kind of cancel that, which can be nice. So when she flips over to She-Hulk, she has a 1-3-2 stat line, drops down to a 4 hand size, which is pretty interesting. And then her whole action is do you even lift? Response after you change this form, deal 2 damage to an enemy. Now it's important to note with this, that's not an attack. So if you dealt damage to an enemy with retaliate, you would not get retaliate back, right? So if I flip over and Zola has retaliate on him, right? So you flip over, you deal 2 damage, you wouldn't get hit 1 back because this is not an attack. It's just dealing damage. Those things are different. So that's our whole hero side. The hit points is huge. It's absolutely nice. Let's look a bit at her cards. First thing we want to look at is Hellcat. Okay, Hellcat's kind of interesting. So it's a 3 cost ally, 2/1/3 stat line, right? 2 threat removal, 1 attack, 3 life. And there's an action you can return Hellcat to your hand. In the beginning, a lot of people said, why would I ever do this? This doesn't seem great. And one of the arguments early on was that you could play Hellcat or have Hellcat out there on the table. From like a previous round, let's say, thwart the 2, return her to your hand, pay the 3 resources, put her back out there, thwart 2 again, and just have 1 consequential damage on, because when she returns to your hand, she would heal up. I think that's a little expensive, basically, because you're paying 3 resources for 4 threat removal, which is a bit much. There is other ways to use her to bounce her back and then use her as a resource. There's some things you might want to do for that, and we can get into that a little bit later. But Hellcat, I feel like a lot of people I love or hated early on. I'm kind of middle of the road with her. I don't think she's terrible, but I don't think she's great. The two thwarting really helps She-Hulk in general. Anytime you have a hero with a low amount of threat removal, like She-Hulk has with only 1, any way you can kind of, help that process out is really, really good. So the ally, not great, not bad. Some people make her work really, really well, I think. I'm just not one of those people. I'm not the biggest fan of this card. Now, Gamma Slam is interesting. It's a 4 cost event. It's a massively expensive card. It's attack superpower, so you can make the argument for Def Focus in your decks. Again, Def Focus is a 1 cost upgrade. Exhaust Def Focus to reduce the cost of a superpower card you play this turn by 1. So Gamma Slam, there's only 1 of these cards in the deck, which is important to note. So you're kind of, if you get this card, you want it to be a massive card, or hopefully be a massive card. If you get it early on, you kind of have to cycle through your deck. But the way it works is pretty interesting. So it's a 4 cost event. Like I said, superpower. Deal X damage to an enemy to a maximum of 15. X is the amount of damage you have sustained. Now, you only have 15 life, right, in general with She-Hulk. So obviously, the max would need to be adjusted somehow. One of the easiest ways to play endurance, then you get 3 extra hit points, so you go from 15 to 18. So if you had, a couple life left, you could do the full 15 damage. Now, the problem with the quote-unquote problem with Gamma Slam is that it's a 4 cost, and on hero side, you only have 4 hand size. So you need to pull a double with 2 other cards, or pull a couple doubles, or again, run something like Def Focus to make it easier. It is supposed to be a very hard card to play, because again, if you are in true solo that you're playing, most villains will get one shot by this, which is actually really strong and really good in that sense, but everything kind of has to align right. You have to find ways to get this card back in your hand. You have to find ways to either fish through your deck for an identity-specific card, something like that. There's not a lot of easy ways to do that, so you kind of have to finagle things. But it's a very interesting card design. It's cool that, again, there's only 1 of them, but you have to line it up right, and that is very, very tough to do in general. So it's not a bad card by any means. It's really cool when it works. I mean, if you can get it to work, it's really cool. But it's tough to make it work. It really is. But it's a great feeling in the game. All right, then we have Ground Stomp, which in my opinion, is not a very good card. It's a 2-cost event. It's a superpower card, again, so you can use Death Focus for this. I think these are the only superpower cards. There are 2 Ground Stomps, so there's going to only be like 3 cards, I think, I have to double check, that can use superpower, which isn't a fantastic trade-off. So a 2-cost event, you deal 1 damage to each enemy. Now, something for like Ultron minions, this is great that you can just clear out all the minions there, but it's not an attack. You're dealing damage, which could be good in certain situations. If you have a lot of minions out there with tough statuses, it could be good for pinging off all the tough, right? Again, a lot of retaliate. It's good to get around that. Past that, it's kind of a weird card. It's got to hit a lot of enemies. And if you have that many enemies out on the table, it's not in a great situation. Now, as a multiplayer card, it's really good, right? Because it's dealing 1 damage to each enemy. So if you're playing a 4-player game and like all your teammates are dealing with a lot of weak minions, then yeah, this card is bonkers good and bonkers strong. For a true solo card, it's not as good, right? So it's got to scale a certain way and differently, but it can be good in the situation. But if you're playing true solo, it's probably not great. But again, if you happen to be playing a multiplayer game and your teammates happen to have a lot of minions on the table, then it makes a lot more sense, right? All right, so next up we have Legal Practice, which was the first alter ego thwarting card that came out. It's a 0-cost event. Choose and discard up to 5 cards from your hand. Remove 1 threat from a scheme for each card discarded this way. Again, you have to be on your alter ego side. It's a pretty interesting card in the way that it works. If you play the card in alter ego, you probably have 6 cards in your hand, right? Because you start with 6, drops down to 4. So you can use this card and dump the other 5 cards. Maybe it helps you cycle. It gets rid of a bunch of threat. Maybe lets you stay down. We can talk about some strategy with that in a little bit. It can be really interesting in the way that it works, and we'll get into with some other cards of how it can work. But it's I feel like it's one of those cards that first came out, everyone would be like, why would you do this? Because honestly, you're paying 5 resources to remove 5 threat. It's not super efficient. Also, there's 2 of these cards I forgot to mention. So you do have 2 of these cards in your deck. It's not, again, super efficient, but if I have a hero that isn't great at thwarting but needs some kind of thwarting ability, like this card's not terrible for that, right? If you compare it to like later on Hulk, who really can't thwart much at all, 5 for 5 isn't great. Actually, it's really 6 for 5. 6 for 5 isn't great, but at least it's something to help the process along. All right, 1-2 Punch is interesting. So it's a 1-cost event. After you make a basic attack, you get to ready She-Hulk. There's 3 of these cards. She comes in with 3 attack on her base amount. Now, if you add something like combat training, so you would get 4, so you'd be able to exhaust, deal 4 damage, spend 1 resource, deal 4 damage, right? But essentially, you're doing 1 for 4 attack with readying up. Really strong. 1 for 4 is a great trade-off because basically, if you scale it up to 2 for 8, we're ahead of the curve when 3 for 8 is the attack. Now, you have to do multiple attacks, so if you're getting retaliated each time or something like that, that's terrible. But if you have to take out a lot of small minions on the board, that part's really nice, right? So 1-2 Punch can be a really strong card, especially if you use combat training or another card that we'll get into in a little bit. But it's a possibly a very strong card in that regard. Split Personality is a very interesting card. It's a very interesting card. So I'm gonna be honest, I didn't understand when I first opened the core box how good this card was. So there's only 1 of these cards, all right, and most likely you should probably play the card. So it's a 3-cost event. Action: change your form, flip your identity card, then draw up to your printed hand size. So why is this good? Basically, if you're in hero form, right, with your 4 cards, you should have enough cards to play this card. And unless you have an amazing hand, you should probably play this card. What it allows you to do is basically dump all your cards. You can flip down, okay, and draw up to 6 hand size, which is obviously really strong, or it's a higher amount, much higher amount. And then you could exhaust to heal She-Hulk, who She-Hulk has 5 recovery, as mentioned before. So if you're getting a little low on life, you can heal for the 5, and then flip back up. Now, when you flip back up, you would deal 2 damage to an enemy. Naturally, that's just what she does. And then you be able to flip up because you can still do the flipping action, right? This was the first card to have a change your form by a card. So again, if you start in hero, you use all your cards to play Split Personality, you flip down, you get to draw up 6 to your hand size of 6 cards, and then you could heal if you wanted to. You don't have to, obviously. And then you could flip back up and dealing 2 damage. Like, this is a very strong combo in general. Again, unless you have something that's absolutely fantastic in your hand. You should probably play this card because getting that 6 hand size in your hero side opens up a lot of possibilities, opens up a lot of different things. Obviously, if you have a double and you can hold on to a card, you will only draw 5 cards, but if it's a massive card you're holding on to, like a Gamma Slam that you're getting ready to go or something like that, really, really good. So anyway, again, I feel like it was one of these cards that we overlooked early on. At least I did, because I didn't really understand how good this can be with flipping and getting the higher hand size. And again, if you just have cards, not that they're bad cards, but cards that just aren't going to work right now, being able to dump them to basically draw a lot more cards, it's pretty good. So it's a really interesting card that works. But again, flipping up to get that 2 damage is really nice. Or flipping back up. And then also being able to flip down, heal, and then come back up. All right, so Superhuman Law Division is an alter ego action. Exhausts this card to spend a mental resource, remove 2 threats from a scheme. So again, if you were to do split personality, you flip down, you already had Superhuman Law Division, and then you drew a mental resource card, right? Or you had something like a Quinn Carrier out on the table where you can just, you only have to play as an Avenger, but let's say you already have it, so you can just exhaust it to generate the resource. You could exhaust this card, generate the resource, remove 2 threat, flip up, deal 2 damage, and have 6 cards, right? It's kind of combo-y of what you have to do, but it's way more interesting than I first gave it credit for. So it's really, really cool in the way that works. But anyway, that is another thing you can do in that combo that's really nice. Now, people have said too that you can, let's say you're dealing with something with a lot of threat on it, you could flip down, you have 6 cards, right? Let's say you happen to draw Legal Practice, you can dump your entire hand to remove a bunch of threat. That is a possibility too if you want to go down that route. All right, so her next card is Focus Rage. It's a 3-cost upgrade. Exhaust Focus Rage and take 1 damage to draw 1 card. It's not great taking the damage and whatnot, but if you, again, can flip down and heal up 5, then it makes a lot more sense. It's much better. There's 2 of these cards, so essentially you could theoretically take 2 damage and be able to draw up. Now, you could use cards. I don't think I got it here, but like First Aid might be worth throwing in your deck if you're relying heavily on this just to heal yourself up so you don't have to flip down. But if you're playing multiplayer and you can flip down a ton, then taking the damage is 100% worth it for sure. All right, and then Superhuman Strength is really interesting. So it's 2 of these cards, 2-cost upgrade. She gets +2 attack. So she starts with 3. Theoretically, you should be able to double stack this. You would get up to, and it's a superpower card. Were the other ones superpower? There's no other superpower, right? So yeah, so it's the only other superpower card out there. The reason I bring this up is for Depth Focus. Here, where you can reduce the cost of the next superpower card you play. So here's the thing with this. After She-Hulk makes an attack, discard Superhuman Strength, stun the attacked enemy. So there is a glitch in the game, right? There is a way you can actually cheat the system by playing against a stalwart villain. So the cost arrow has been changed a lot over time. It might be changed again later on from this video. But what you can do is, the way that it works is, it states that the way the cost arrow works is that you have to pay everything in the front of the card to do the second half of the card. But if there is no target for the second half of the card, you can't do the first half. Does that make sense? It's kind of weird in the way that works. But basically, after She-Hulk attacks and discards Superhuman Strength, okay, in order to pay that cost, you have to have a valid target. Stun the attacked enemy. Well, if the attacked enemy has Stalwart, you can't stun that enemy. So it's actually not a valid target, which means you can't pay the cost. Does that kind of make sense? It's really weird, I know, but it's basically a glitch with her. And they have to change it at some point, because this is obviously not how the card was meant to be used. But because of how they've changed cost arrows over time, this is how the rules have become. So theoretically, since there's 2 of these cards in there, you could stack this. So she starts with a 3 base attack. Let's say you put combat training, which is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. She could swing for 8, and then you use a card like, what is it? 1-2 punch. So theoretically, you could do 8 damage, 1-2 punch to write yourself up, deal another 8 damage, right? And 16 like takes out a lot of villains. But if you had another 1-2 punch, do it again, right? It's kind of strong. It's kind of really strong. And then you figure later on, you get cards like Limitless Stamina, where again, you can just ready up your hero. 1-2 punch has a little bit of a limitation with, after you make a basic attack, then you have to ready them up. But you can use Limitless Stamina as well to just hit them. It's way too strong. It's way too strong. It's way too good. Again, I think they'll change this at some point, because this is, in my opinion, obviously not how this card was meant to be used. I don't think the stalwart keyword existed at that point either. So they'll probably change it, but as of right now, you could do even getting one of them out there to be able to swing for 5, even without combat training, is really good. I mean, just swinging for 5 is like stupidly strong. So it is one of those things that you can right now take advantage of. It is completely legal. It's completely allowed for now. Some of the other things is I've talked about combat training with her aggression. I think she makes a lot of sense in Justice too, with cards like Upside the Head. Right after hero makes a basic attack, you're probably going to be doing that a lot, and damages the enemy. Confuse that enemy. This is great because again, if you can flip down the confusion side, draw it to that bigger hand size of 6, and then when threat gets put on the main scheme, you get to prevent one of that threat. If it goes up by 1 or 2, that helps you out a lot, especially in solo play. So this could be a very strong card. If they're already confused, you can stun them as well, which is a really great combo. If again you can somehow play 2 upside the heads in a row, that's really great. Or if you're still, let me back up for a second. You attack, play upside the head, right? Dealing 4 damage. You confuse the enemy. You get to ready up from 1-2 punch or limitless stamina or something like that. And you have another upside the head. You attack again. Excuse me. And then you stun that enemy. This allows you basically to flip down that turn, heal up, do whatever you have to do. Or probably not heal up, but whatever you have to do. Enemy is confused. This way, when you do flip back up, the enemy is now stunned. This card, I think, is really good for She-Hulk in general. Sonic Rifle, you can make the argument for it too. It's just kind of expensive, but it is nice to be able to confuse the enemy and flip down when you have to. Like I said, Queen Carrier is really good for generating those resources, which is really strong. And also, I just got to mention Unshakable. You have a 15 printed hand size versus, or a 15 printed hit points versus 14. Your character will get steady. It's really nice because the one thing that can kind of slow her down is if she was stunned. Being able to give her steady, so you have to get stunned twice to actually cancel out, is really nice, because if you're stunned, now you have to do something like just exhaust to cancel out that stun. And you can't use a card like, where is it? Ground Stomp, because it's not an attack. So if you were stunned, you could still play this card. I guess that's another benefit of this card, if like you just need 1 damage. But basically the only way you're really getting through her stuns is by exhausting her, or by playing like an attack event that you added from somewhere else, like an aggression deck or something like that. So what do I think of She-Hulk overall? I think she's a lot better than we gave her credit for in the beginning. Now, look, I'm guilty of this as much as the next person. I truly didn't understand the value of a lot of her cards. I think Split Personality, for me personally, was one of those cards where I didn't see the value. Like, why would I dump my hand to like drop down? And I think it was just because I was so new at the game, I didn't really understand fully. But it is really strong when you use it, quote unquote, correctly. When you pair it up with Superhuman Law Division and some of the resource generators that are out there now, is really great. Can be really good. Now, one of the things I didn't really talk about that's kind of weak with her is that she is the Avenger trait on hero side, but she's also Gamma, which they've done nothing with yet. So hopefully in the future they do. Let's hope for some World War Hulk stuff. But if they expand upon Gamma, she's gonna get really strong. And her alter ego side, she's an attorney. Keyword. I mean, have they ever done attorney ever again? Like, it's so weird. I feel like they didn't have a lot of plans for some of that stuff sometimes. But I guess hypothetically they could come out with an attorney card if they wanted to. So anyway, her cards herself, or themselves, I think, again, we got kind of a boost with, what was it? Superhuman Strength that we weren't expecting to, which made her stronger than she really should be. Healing cards that have come out with like First Aid nowadays help her out with Focused Rage, which is nice. Superhuman Law Division is a better card because if you can team it up with Split Personality, right, it's really nice and be able to use it that way. And then just making her be able to swing for a lot is really good. So her weaknesses are essentially removing threats, right? Being able to flip down, and especially if you use upside the head to confuse the enemy, can be really strong. So they don't throw it, and then you can prevent 1 threat removal. But she has no real way of removing threat, which is her big weakness, except for her alter ego card of Legal Practice. And people will say, well, you can just use Legal Practice. It's really expensive to remove threat that way. Like, honestly, for me, Legal Practice is kind of one of those cards I use in a worst case situation, right? It's not the card I'm looking for to do. Now, what's nice is with aggression nowadays, there's a lot of aggression cards that have, if you defeat an enemy, you get to remove 2 threat from a main scheme, or whatever it is, right? There's different cards that help remove threat. There's enough allies out there now that you can run the allies and kind of remove threat. Like, for example, I would still run X Gonna Give It To You with a She-Hulk, just because being able to remove 3 threat is absolutely huge. And then you can confuse an enemy or stun a minion or something like that. That could be really good in general with her. But anything that helps remove threat is really strong. Playing Nick Fury, for example, and having just a lot of doubles in your deck can help. I feel like also we spent a lot of time looking at Gamma Slam early on because we're like, I want to deal 4 for 15 because that's a bonkers card, and it doesn't always work out the way you want. Now, when it does, really cool feeling. One of the best feelings in Marvel Champions. But until it does, it's not great. So anyway, I guess my overall for or against is that I was against her early on because I didn't understand how her kit works, generally speaking. Now, there are still weak cards in there. Like I said, Gamma Slam is kind of tough to use. Hellcat, I'm a little iffy on, but I appreciate the 2 threat removal, which is nice. Ground Stomp, I don't think is very good. Legal Practice, I don't think is very good. 1-2 Punch, pretty good. Split Personality, I think could be really good. Superhuman Law Division was better than I gave it credit for. Focus Rage and Superhuman Strength, I think are really good. You definitely want that, again, to get that card draw going, get that extra attack going. So I was very against her, but now I'm much more for her. And I don't have specific builds for her anymore. Like, I don't play her in Protection, but Justice, Aggression work really well with her. Both those. Leadership works all right. I'm not a huge fan of it. A lot of basic cards make a lot of sense for her. So overall, I mean, she's gotten a lot better. She's gotten a lot better because I've understood the game better, I guess is the best way. She hasn't changed much. I mean, obviously cards like Limitless Stamina, Unshakable, Queen Carrier, all those things help her out for sure. But I got better as a player, and I think that helped her out the most, if that makes sense. So let me know down in the comments what you think about She-Hulk. Did you kind of quote-unquote misunderstand her early on? Did you always really like her? Kind of what were your thoughts and feelings about that? While you're down there, make sure to hit the like button, hit subscribe, all that stuff. It really helps the channel. Go over to twitch.tv/D20 Woodworking. Join the live stream community over there. It's a lot of fun. We can talk about the different cards and stuff. We can just hang out, whatever it may be. But yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I will see you all next time.